On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who are new here, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in the life science space. I help companies scale and manage complexity and increase their performance. Today, we're going to be joined by Bella Englebach. Bella is a consultant in the life sciences and focuses in on lean, operational excellence, and continuous improvement. Welcome, Bella.
Wow, it's great to be here, Don. It's so much fun for me to be on a podcast that is really focused on life sciences. So thanks so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Can you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
So I started my career in the life sciences. I worked at a university, moved from a university to a pharmaceutical company, and then left there and spent almost 10 years doing consulting. And so I had the opportunity to move around as one does as a consultant and work with multiple pharma companies, mostly big ones, but some small ones. And then, as sometimes happens, I got hired by one of my clients. Yeah, that happens sometimes. And I ended up back in the pharmaceutical company, and I was in a little biotech company that was bought by a big company. And so I had the opportunity to ride that train that so many of us do, going from the little tiny, everybody knows everybody wears 14 hats organization to a really massive pharmaceutical company. But all the time I was really focused on process and how did we get work done. And so I had a lot of adventures. I was always in research and development, and working not just in the operational side of R&D, which is, I think, a very interesting thing to talk about, but also on the innovation side of R&D and working with product teams and working on this incredibly long product development time we have for drugs. Why is that so long? And we all know the reasons, but can we fix that? So I was there for longer than I expected to be, and 3 years ago I left and started my own company. And I have been focused on, mostly because of the pandemic, I've been focusing on doing writing, on a podcast, and on coaching. So that's what I'm doing today.
Very good. So, as you said, I mean, in addition to your coaching and lean work, you have a podcast. What is the focus of your podcast?
So my podcast is called The Edges of Lean. So I'm very fascinated by the idea that we have when we talk about lean, and I don't know how many of you listeners are really into lean or Lean Six Sigma. But when we talk about it, there's this idea, this very discrete body of knowledge. But in fact, I've observed two things. First of all, there are things that people who are outside lean, there are things that they can teach us. Things about ourselves, things about how to lead, how to manage. So I'm very interested in that. But I'm also very interested in who's discovered the same principles that we talk about in lean and use them in a completely different place. They may never have heard of Toyota, they may never have heard of lean startup, they may not have heard of agile, any of these things, but they're using the principles. Okay, so how did they learn them? Where are they learning them, and how did they do it? So I have guests. One of my first guests was a jet pilot who had been in the Navy and now flies for a major airline, and he was telling me all about how the military uses an OODA loop, which is not unlike a PDCA cycle, a plan, do, check, act cycle. And how did he learn to lead in the military, and how does he use that in the cockpit of an aircraft today? So that was really interesting. And then I had somebody who talked about what about grief in the workplace? Well, gosh, what a weird thing to talk about. But think about how much grief there is in the workplace right now. People have lost jobs. People have lost family members. People have lost the ability to work with their team. Everybody has something that they may be grieving about. Well, how do you handle that? And so that was also, a really cool podcast. But the thing I love most about my podcast is that I make a really big effort to make sure I'm bringing the voices of women and people of color to the conversation. And so that's one of my biggest goals, is to bring in voices that we don't hear very much and give them an opportunity to share their knowledge and their wisdom. So it's called The Edges of Lean. It's on all the major podcast providers. It has been dropping every Friday. I'm just moving it to Wednesdays. So there'll be a new one this Wednesday. And thanks for asking, Dad. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Wednesdays are a pretty popular day, it seems. I know from my research as well, in terms of these live events, it's the same sort of thing that having something after 5 o'clock seems to be important to people. Wednesdays also seem to be a very popular day for podcasts being released as well. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about what you did prior to being a consultant? You touched on it in your introduction, in terms of your focus on, R&D. Just more interested in terms of trying to delve more into your background and what it is that you did prior to being a consultant.
Oh, thanks for asking that too. So I had actually studied in a lab, like most people did. And from the lab, I went into medical writing. And now here's the reason I went into medical writing. I went into medical writing because my job got moved and I couldn't really move because of my job. So there was a job that was open in medical writing. And so I had been in the lab and working actually in a discovery lab. So in working in the discovery lab, the very beginning of the process of putting a new drug product on the market, right? And honestly, I went in, did my experiments. I had the opportunity to write. I had a wonderful, wonderful boss who really wanted me to author my own papers and to present at conferences. So I got all of those experiences and then moved to medical writing. Well, when you're in medical writing, you're at the other end of the process. If you're involved in filing an NDA, a new drug application, or a BLA, a biologics license application, or you're working on manuscripts for publications, helping out with those, now you see the result of that whole process. And so that was really my first introduction to, wow, this is a really big process. It takes a long time. I was working on NDAs, and some of the studies that were going on the NDAs were a decade old. Gosh, wow! And so I was really struck by that. But I ended up I stayed in medical writing when I was in the pharmaceutical company, because I was known as a writer. I was invited to go back to a consulting company as a writer. Well, it wasn't long after I was there that they sent me out to actually start to do some process consulting. Now, back in those days, and this is a long time ago, Don, long time ago. I don't want to even tell you how long ago it was. We talked about business process reengineering. There was a book on it, right? And I think we all read the book. And I don't know that I understood a lot about what I was doing, but I learned some very important things. First of all, if you write down what you want people to do, which is what today we call standard work, one of course Toyota was calling it standard work, then I didn't know it. If you write that down and people start to follow it, you can start to see where problems are, right? If you standardize things often go better. And then the other thing that was like this massive realization that came to me is when you change people's work, if they're not involved in changing the work themselves, they get very upset. So I remember my very first meeting that we were working on, I don't know, a protocol development or something like that. And somebody leaving the room in tears because we were planning to change the way the work went. I remember being like massively taken aback by that. And I think that was my first real introduction to the idea that it's not just about process, it's about people.
And change
So,
management for
if I did
sure.
that,
Yeah.
change management, I didn't know what that was.
Right.
I was introduced to that later too. I mean, honestly, I wish I could tell you I had this brilliant career where I knew what I was doing all the way along, but I was just learning the hard way, which is
Yeah, it's
that's what you
funny
do.
because the analogy that I
At
often
least that's what I did.
use, the analogy that I often use for clients on standard work is that if you can imagine a batter in a batter's box, you want to provide enough definition, sort of to get the batter to the batter's box and allow them to swing and things like that. But if you are just as controlling in standard work, where you want to like take control of their hands and exactly how they're going to swing the bat, that's a little bit too much. I mean, most people, start to resist then, and that's probably, in part, it sounds like you guys were trying to do it without the batter entirely. So, yeah.
Well, you know what? The way that we did it in those days was, and I don't know, it's too different from the way some people do it now because of just when you're dealing with a large organization, how do you do it? You get 7 people in a room, you get Post-it notes, you map out the process. You say, well, is this what we want to do? Or do we want to do something that might be better? We didn't really understand that about, at least I didn't understand about continuous improvement. It was mostly about, can we just get this written down, get the health authority, get the FDA off our backs, right? Because we need to get this written down. I mean, this is pretty primitive stuff. And then we started to run into these problems. Well, this type of product, a company has a product that was a drug device combination. Well, if you try to do it the right way for drugs, it's not going to work for devices, right? So, different regulations, much shorter life cycle, a development life cycle. So you had to do something a little bit different. Okay, so where's that sweet spot? And I think that was what I didn't know. What we didn't know in those days was, well, how do you do that additional work so that you're designing that standard work, as you're saying, Don, so you could have batters who different height and different experience and right-handed, left-handed come in and all use the same standard work, right? And learn something from each of them. So that was when I started to get really interested into this idea of, we were all about, well, okay, we're going to write this stuff down. We'll call it an SOP. We're going to make a nice binder of it. Everybody's going to get the binder. And I was sitting back there thinking, yeah, but you know what? People are going to find better ways to do this. How do we get that information back? So I started talking about that. And then some of the quality people, like, I love quality people. They're some of my best friends, but oh my gosh, the quality people are like, well, yeah, but we wrote it down. Now we're going to have
So
deviations.
you must follow it this way.
You must follow it. And we don't have a deviation policy, so you can't not follow it. So I guess I'd be a little bit uncomfortable with that. But then when I left that consulting company, I went back into pharma, and I had the opportunity to live with the consequences of what I was writing. That was a massive amount of learning. So for those of you who are listening, right, if you got to hold your consultants accountable to, they're going to walk away, and they should walk away. They shouldn't be with you for the rest of their lives, even if they would like to sell you more stuff. You need to hold them accountable to having you engaged enough in the process that when they walk away, you can continue to improve it, right? That's my advice for anyone who's hiring a consultant. Make sure that you are holding them accountable to what they should be accountable for.
Yeah, absolutely. So and for anybody that's watching live, I just wanted to jump in really quickly and say that you can say hello and also let us know what state you're from. And we, I'd love to mention you later on in the podcast as well. Sorry, I know I interrupted you there really quickly, but
that's okay.
So one of the things I've heard you say though as well is that you applied scientific thinking to solve business problems. What does that mean?
That is, I think, one of the really key questions about how we do continuous improvement in the life sciences. So one of the things that I learned, again, coming up the hard way, was that while we were being scientists, right? We were doing science to solve scientific problems. As soon as there was a business problem, we stopped using science. So we, rather than saying, I have a hypothesis about how, say, for example, this merger is going to work, right? And I need to do
Right.
something to test the hypothesis. There would be this sense of knowing. And the people who knew were the people who you should listen to, right? And then what happened over and over and over again, the people would say, well, we need to do it. We need to do something in this way. We went ahead, wrote out a project plan that said this is going to happen on this date and this is going to happen on this date and so on and so forth. And then, of course, along the way, stuff happened. We
Sure.
learned things, but we never took that into account. And as I was learning more about lean and lean thinking, and the people in lean kept saying, well, what we're doing is doing the scientific method, I suddenly had this aha realization to say, well, of course, that's what the problem is, right? We are not actually using the scientific method that we know how to use to solve our business problems. So, I mean, you can think of almost any example. You have a new hire. You don't know this person very well. I have a standard about how I bring a new hire on board. Well, that's a hypothesis. The standard is going to help bring this new person on board. What if you approach that like a scientist and said, it's like a little bit of a new creature I have in the lab. I need to understand this creature. Let me apply this thing to it, which might be your onboarding plan. See how they react. What's the result I get? Is it similar or not similar to the result I expected? My hypothesis was the way I onboard people will help people get on board effectively and they get to work first. If it doesn't work, okay, let's learn something from that. That's what being a scientist is all about. So it could be a little thing like that. It could be a huge thing like I'm going to implement, somebody sold us a gigantic project management system. We're spending, I don't know, $10 million. I don't know how much these things cost. $10 million. Let's just make it up. We're spending $10 million on a project management system. All right. So now you have a hypothesis this project management system is going to help you get work done faster or better or more controlled or whatever. Did we
Yeah.
actually test that hypothesis? Probably not, right? So we stop being scientists. So, we step out of the lab. Everyone wants to get out of the lab. You take the white coat off. Look at me. I am now in an office. You get so excited. I have a cubicle now. I mean, come on. And then that would be scientists. And I think, and that's what lean brings back to us. Lean brings back to us this idea that you should always be a scientist. You should always be saying, all right, I think this thing's going to happen. Well, is there a hypothesis here? Really, what is my hypothesis? And is what I'm doing actually going to test the hypothesis? So it's kind of simple, but it's also really hard because there's so much pressure from the way that people are taught about the business side to just, make decisions and just move forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely critical that, that you just continue to adjust and tweak throughout time. I mean, the ideas that we have today, are important, in terms of the way that things could work. However, the future of things could also be different, and so you might need to adjust your original hypothesis to now match your new circumstance as well. So,
exactly, Don. And the key is, I was
ahead.
just say the key is be clear that it is a hypothesis. Like it worked last time, right? Maybe it's going to work this time. I have an hypothesis because it worked last time. It's going to work this time. All right. Well, maybe your variables change. You're a scientist. You know about variables. Variables change. Maybe it won't work. You learn something. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. So, also, you said that you have a coaching practice. I'm just curious, what does your coaching practice focus on? Who are your typical clients, and what is it that they're trying to, gain additional support for?
My coaching practice is focused on people in the life sciences. It's usually people who I think are sort of in the middle management stage or sometimes even early in their career. So I'm not one of those people who say, I only work with CEOs. I really like to work with people who are in that place, which I think is you can feel like really crunched. So if you are a middle manager, right, or you are in one of these environments that is as a manager, everybody's on a team, right? It's very matrixed. It's a very difficult position because you get objectives provided for you from sometimes very on high in the organization, if it's a big organization, or objectives that are coming at you very fast. If it's a small organization, you're more in that startup phase, right? And then you have people who are depending on you as employees or as team members, particularly if you're leading a team or in a role like a project manager on a team. And so they're also, you should be wanting to support them, but at the same time, they're making demands on you, whether you know it or not. And you can feel like really crunched.
Sure.
And so I think it's a super difficult position to be in. And frankly, it's a position I think that a lot of people don't get coaching from their company, right? So the company is going to provide coaching for the executives, maybe people
Sure.
who are 1, 2, 3 levels above you. But you really need somebody to help you essentially run experiments about what you're doing. And it might be what you're doing at work, or it might be what you're doing about your life in general. So I have some clients that we really focus on their work, actually. So, somebody who might be, say, for example, leading a team, and they want to have better team skills, be a better team leader, but at the same time manage in the science environment, which is tough because you have to know a lot of stuff about the science as well as know about how to be a team leader. And then I have clients who are like, hey, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore, but what do I do differently? And, so it might be, I don't say I'm a career coach because I'm not a traditional career coach, but it's again about, all right, so here, what's your current situation? What do you aspire to? What might you aspire to? What experiments do you do to find your way to get from one place to another? But it's always about doing it as a scientist. I'm not big into sort of woo-woo stuff. I'm not into like personal affirmations of people like that. That's great. You can do that. I think scientific evidence shows it's not particularly effective, but some people like to do this. So I'm not really into that kind of stuff, but I'm definitely into, okay, we're in a situation, something happened. What did we think was going to happen? What actually happened? What can we learn from that? What are you going to do differently next time? And we have some really interesting adventures and conversations as we go through that with people. And I will say also, I do coach men, and I'd love to coach women because, again, I think sometimes men get more opportunities for coaching. But I always contract directly with the client, not with their company.
Yeah, I think it's. In part, I think it's true. I know a lot of the companies that I worked for, they offered, coaching at different levels and things like that. But, it's one of those things too, where I had, somebody very early in career at one point, I know, coming to me, wanting to be my coach. And I remember having a conversation with my manager, just asking them, what do you think I'll glean out of this situation? And each opportunity where we met, I just didn't exactly walk away with something that I felt was of value. And so, when your clients are meeting with you, I guess, how do you calibrate, where they are versus, kind of, your background? And then also, how do you make sure that they walk away with something that they feel is of value?
The number one thing is that it is their process and the coaching is for them, right? So I don't know about you, Don, but if you have experience like I do, it's very easy to fall into teaching and say, well, I had a situation like this and I did that, right? Well, you're not in their situation. Okay. Right. You're not. They're in a different company. They're in a different place. Their background is different. So so I try to stay away from that. I really have them decide what it is they want to do, what's the next step that they want to take. And what I do is really prod deep reflective thinking. So my clients, I think, will sometimes hear me say, they'll say, well, what I learned was this, and I'll listen. And then I will try to ask questions that will probe, was there something else that they learned? Is there something else that could be seen from that they perhaps haven't perceived yet? And that, I believe, is what's valuable to people, is not that I have the world's best advice, because I absolutely did not have the world's best advice. And any coach who tells you that is lying. But I am pretty good at helping people take the next step in their thinking and, really think through either what they're going to do. And like I said, why they're going to do it. What's the hypothesis? And then think about what they've actually learned from something. And so, it's a client can come into a meeting and they'll be super excited sometimes because they tried something and it worked. But I've actually had a client come into a meeting and be super excited because they tried something and it totally bombed. It was like, and they're like, Bella, I learned so much from that. That was great. And my job as a coach is to make sure if they're going to do something that's risky, that it's not super risky, right? They're not going to go in and, if their plan is they're going to go in and yell at their boss, we'll have a conversation about that, right? Because that would be too risky. But we would have a conversation about, well, what's your hypothesis about what the boss needs to hear, right? Okay. Do you have any evidence for that? Okay. And then what might you try that would be a quick experiment, as opposed to, I'm going to go and do something that's going to blow my career up. So, that's my coaching style. And it's about them. It's about, they take the steps, they do with it what they want to do, and hopefully I help them think about it more deeply. I think we always have fun.
Yeah, it is one of the things that I've loved about, myself getting certified in coaching, and then I have, directors and above coaching clients as well, and just kind of understanding the boundaries of that walk, right, is important. But yeah, I mean, that whole idea of delivering value is something that's always in the back of my mind. Is, how do you as a coach make sure that the people that you're coaching, get the most value out of it? Because I look at what these people are trying to do, and overall, if they get out there in the world and they do good, then it's overall beneficial for the entire environment. So for sure.
Yeah, and I think that there is certainly at least the idea, the return on investment in coaching is multiple, right? For every dollar that you spend on coaching, you'll get, what is it, $100 back in value, whatever that value is to you, and whether that's, the promotion that you're looking for, which I would never promise that, or it's, you sleep better at night.
Yeah. And then you also have a book titled Creatively Lean. Can you tell us about the book?
Yeah. So the book is called Creatively Lean, How to Get Out of Your Own Way and Drive Innovation Throughout Your Organization. So one of the things that, I mentioned is I'm very interested in, when we talk about lean, what are the things that are kind of like lean or that could enhance our lean thinking? And one of the things that I really can believe can enhance our lean thinking is really understanding how creativity works. So I'm also a certified creative problem solving facilitator. And in creative problem solving, we learn about divergent thinking, which is like how to think broadly, and convergent thinking, which is how to select and move forward and strengthen ideas. So there's a cycle of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. So as I was learning various lean tools and various lean ways of problem solving, one of the things I thought was interesting was that there was not a lot of discussion at any point about should I be divergently or convergently. And lean and Six Sigma especially have a lot of of tools and approaches for convergence. How do you pick something? So you can think of like your prioritization matrices, for example. That's about converging. That's about picking something. But how do you get all the stuff that goes into the matrix? And the other thing that I had observed, in particularly working in research and development, was that one of the things that really scared people away about lean was this idea was that people had that was it was all about convergence. It was all about being, we was talking before, so it was all about getting to that standard work and making sure that everything was very, very focused, and that meant that there was no room for innovation. And as you know, Don, when you're working with a scientist, particularly someone who's, say, in discovery, their mind is all over the place. They're thinking wacky stuff, interesting stuff, connecting ideas all the time, right? So you try to take them and you bring them in. You say, well, we're going to do lean, and we're going to 5S your office. They'll probably kill you. So you don't want to do that. 5S is a way of organizing your workplace, right? So you don't organize somebody else's office, and so. As I worked on my own personal practice, I developed ways of using divergent thinking and convergent thinking in things like doing an A3. So I'm a big believer in the A3 for certain types of problems, right? Yep. And in the marvelous book about A3s, which I don't have a copy on my desk right now. Got like 6 copies over there. It's really great. It's just, actually there's a lot of great books about A3s, but it never mentions divergent thinking and convergent. I think, well, somebody needs to talk about this. And of course, there's also design thinking, which is, brings these concepts in and has the sort of the lean focus of having learning cycles, and doing small iterations, right? So I wanted to be sure I wasn't sort of reinventing design thinking, because there's better brains than mine that have done that. So I really just pulled things from my own practice, and I ended up writing a business novel, which was the last thing I thought I would write. It's actually we talked about middle managers. It's actually about a middle manager and how she uses both a lean approach along with creative problem-solving tools to solve problems in her organization and have a better and happier organization. So thanks for asking about the book.
Yeah, I like quite a few of those, the business style novels. I don't think I would ever be talented enough to write a story in that method, right? So that good work on your behalf to be able to pull that one off.
Well, never say never, Don, because I was not going to write a business novel. When I sat down to write this book, it was going to be an instruction book, right? Because that's I'm like, give me the instructions.
Sure.
But I was actually persuaded by my behind-the-scenes writing partner that it was very important for my voice to come out, that it shouldn't sound like an instructional manual. So it seemed actually that to tell a story was the best way to do that. So that's how we ended up where we are.
So I have one last
question. And you
question.
don't know. My happy to you.
Yeah, right. So I'm in the middle. Interestingly enough, I'm in the middle right now of the book proposal process. So we'll see what happens at the end with my book as well. But you never
that's
know.
Wonderful.
I've also heard you say, in terms of your coaching style, that you use the Toyota coaching methodology. What does that mean?
So what I do is I use the Toyota Kata coaching methodology. So for people who don't know Kata is a practice that was codified by a guy named Mike Rother. Mike is a professor at the University of Michigan, which is where they do a lot of great academic research on lean. And what Mike has done is really written down what is the coaching pattern that Toyota managers use with their employees. And actually, you know what, Don, is a scientific method, right? And the purpose is to teach scientific thinking. So I have to say, I know that some of the people who are like really, really, really into Kata will say, well, I do it wrong. And I probably do it wrong. But what I talk about using the Kata, that really is about following the practice. A Kata is a martial arts practice, that you do over and over again to look at the way that you that you move, right?
Right.
What I use the cud and what it means is when someone comes into a coaching session with me, we're going to start out with the same questions every time. Every single time we're going to have the same questions. It's not going to be different. Now we're going to, as we get into what we're talking about, there are going to be different questions, but there's going to be a basic fundamental pattern. And the pattern is this: what is your challenge, which is what's the big thing you're aiming for? Where are you in the process? Which, and then they're probably working on a target condition. So what's your target condition? So what's a target condition? So you can think of, from a life sciences perspective, you could think of the target condition as the challenge might be, I want to get this new product on the market, right? From a target condition might be something smaller, like I want to write this protocol, right? So you're working on the big thing, but you're really only working on a small thing right now. That's the target condition. When you achieve that target condition, that should, hypothesis, get you closer to your challenge, right?
Okay.
And then the next set of questions are around, well, what was your last experiment? What did you just do? And what did you expect to happen? That's your hypothesis, right? And what actually happened?
Gotcha.
What did you learn? We always talk about, what did we learn, right? And I probably in a coaching session probably spend most of the time focusing on what did we learn, and then, okay, well, what's your next step going to be? And then if you achieve a target condition, we always have a little Zoom party. I go like this, yay. Right. For those of you, if anyone's just listening, I'm like jigging up and down, waving my hands. I'm doing jazz hands.
Right.
If you don't like parties, we don't do that. But it's just a pattern, and I've kind of put that on top of. I'm also a certified professional coach, so I've kind of put that on top of the the coaching steps that you learn when you're learning to be a coach. So when I do intake of a new client, we'll go through a lot of questions, that will help us start to understand what their challenge might be that they want to work on, but I don't necessarily. Once we're in the process, it's probably more focused on the cud, just because it really helps scientists be scientific about things that they're not used to being scientific about. Yeah. So, and thanks to Mike Rother for that.
Yeah. Absolutely critical. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. Bella, what inspires you?
What inspires me this is going to sound so trite, are my grandchildren. They're just so much fun, and they're just great little scientists. They love to do experiments, even if they don't know that they're doing an experiment. So it just inspires me to watch them, see them try things. And then we have conversations about, well, what did you think was going to happen? And what did you learn? My granddaughter, actually, she's taking singing lessons, Brown Grammar, and she actually has a visual board for her singing lessons, what she's working on, what she's learned. So that's, it's great to see little kids be real scientists.
It's funny to me how, a lot of things in the world have evolved. And whenever you talked about your inspiration, where my mind went was, back to education, because this whole idea of having standardized learning where all the kids are kind of fit through the same exact thing, they're not allowed to creatively think. They're not really problem solving. They're more or less playing chutes and ladders every single day with the, colored cards, trying to figure out how to get from the initial start of the game to the end with no strategy or anything else. And it's one of the things that I'd love to see, the education of children and our grandchildren continue to evolve, to use the tools that are being used in industry, and, teach people things like creative problem solving and things like that through their process. And that's what I heard you kind of highlight as well.
Yeah, definitely. There are school systems that are doing that. There are school systems that really is into improvement. Any of your watchers or listeners who are interested in that, check those school systems out. They're doing some really, really cool stuff.
And what concerns you?
I think, the thing that concerns me the most right now is the anti-science movement. I really, really worries me the people who are, just don't get science, don't understand science, who want a certain answer when, as you and I know, Don, and your listeners and watchers know, science doesn't always provide that perfect answer. You have to keep getting more data and doing more work, and the fact that we can't get out of this pandemic because people are afraid of vaccines. To me, that is, that really concerns me. It concerns me that we can't take scientific approaches to solving problems with climate change. That people are just not believed, and that there's this idea there's some sort of there's conspiracies going on. That really concerns me, and I would love to see a change in that. And it's actually something that I've been concerned about for a long time. I'm kind of horrified to see how far along the anti-science movement has come.
Yeah, it was interesting.
But that's a downer. That's a real downer, I got to say.
Yeah, but this last week, I somebody highlighted for me. They said that the new sort of mainstream thing that people are talking about for curing COVID is drinking your own urine now. And I was just like, look at between that and drinking bleach and exposing yourself to light. I mean, okay, you guys can believe whatever you want, but what are you doing to actually validate these decisions before you go and do something crazy? I mean, come on. I would much rather go take a shot than drink my own urine. So no, thank you.
That's it, folks. Don will not drink his own urine. Well, we have it on record.
I'm a flat no on that one. Sorry.
Okay.
What excites you?
Oh my gosh, what excites me is actually seeing things like people who are learning to use scientific thinking. That really excites me. There's a huge movement of people who are learning kata, and that really excites me. That there are people who are learning to think scientifically, even if they have never thought of themselves as being a scientist. And then the other thing that excites me is just in the lean community is how many women are really starting to get their voices heard. And it's not just because of my podcast, which is a very small piece of that, but there are many more women. I think if you go to a conference, you're going to see more women on the stage. You're going to see more women and people of color leading workshops. You're going to see more publications. You're going to hear more voices on podcasts for the people that you haven't heard from. And that's really exciting, because the more people we have thinking about the problems we have in the world, the more chance we have of solving some of those problems and making me less concerned about what's going on. So that I find that very, very exciting, and anything that anyone can do to move that forward is great.
Well, especially on Martin Luther King Day, the day that we're recording this, right? I mean, what an important thing to mention as well. Just just any underrepresented population, just having them have a platform to be able to speak out is important and should excite us all.
Absolutely.
Well, Bella Englebach, I wanted to thank you for being a guest here on the podcast, and thank you for spending time with me. I greatly appreciate it. And for all of our listeners, how can they get in touch with you, or how can they find you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. If you're one of those people who uses LinkedIn, I'm the only Bella Engelbach on LinkedIn. You won't have any problem finding me. And my website is leanforhumans, all one word, .com, leanforhumans.com. And there you can also find a link to the podcast, and you can order an autographed copy of the book. And I just love to talk to people. So reach out to me. I'm always good for a cup of coffee. virtual coffee until we get rid of this pandemic.
Yes, very nice. And so on the podcast website at www.lifesciencesuccess.com, we will have the transcript of this episode as well as links to get in touch with Bella as well. Thank you so much, Bella.
Thanks so much, Don.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.